So when you talk about Nintendo and their massive library of classic games that have come out over the course of various different Nintendo consoles, there are a few different ways that we can now relive many of these titles in the modern era. Nintendo Switch Online being the most obvious culprit, where we see a ton of different classic Nintendo systems with a large chunk of games from those libraries, as you can look around and realize that we have NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance all playable, in addition to things like Sega Genesis as part of the subscription service. And while that is a nice format to experience many classic games, there is also some situations where we are seeing Nintendo handpick games specifically from libraries like the GameCube, and in today's video the focal point being around the 3DS, as we are starting to see a trend with a few different GameCube projects and now 3DS projects with how Nintendo is choosing to re-release certain classic titles from these libraries, primarily due to the fact that the graphical fidelity of the games already looks relatively impressive enough if you just did a simple upres, and you can move it over and it still looks and plays up to about the quality of a Nintendo Switch game today. It might not look like a visual showpiece like Tears of the Kingdom would, but in general, you could take a 3DS game like we saw at the most recent Nintendo Direct with that brief snippet of Luigi's Dark Moon that is headed over to the Switch in 2024, and it actually looks really good when you just clean up the resolution and you make the controls fully compatible on a Switch, which does not seem very hard to do, and Nintendo could potentially get $40 to $60 out of those releases. And in today's video, I want to break down 5 different 3DS games that I think would be a great fit for the Nintendo Switch or even future next-gen console hardware, and talk about what evidence we have that suggests that Nintendo will do this so far, and even some outstanding rumors of a game or two that could be headed to the Switch from the 3DS library in the future, and we need to get on the same page with all of those details right now. What's up, nation? Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification if you haven't already. And as mentioned, guys, today I want to discuss 5 different 3DS games that I think would be a fantastic fit for the Nintendo Switch in the modern era that we see today. Now, some people are not the biggest fan of the port and remaster treatment to games. I personally am a fan of re-released games. I like to be able to play games that I have some level of nostalgia for, or that I remember being a timeless classic, and be able to experience them on modern hardware that I play today. Yes, a lot of these games I could go back and boot up a 3DS and experience, or I could hook up a Wii, Wii U, or GameCube and relive all of those same games, but I was always a fan of things like the Game Boy player on the GameCube that would allow you to play things like your handheld games on a modern Nintendo home console. And while I've rebought my fair share of Nintendo games over the years, I do think when you have your favorite games easily accessible on the latest hardware, it is a win-win situation for everybody involved. If you're not a fan of ports and remasters, you clearly don't have to buy them, and we are seeing something more of a trend recently, of course, likely due to the Nintendo Switch being in the tail end of its life cycle. It may have another year left being the flagship device, it may be less than that, but we do know that Nintendo will ultimately move on to what is next when it comes to new hardware, and a card that we see Nintendo pull historically when they are transitioning to new hardware and having their teams develop new games for that new hardware is to rely on a little bit of the ports and remasters to kind of give the developers some buffer time. Take some easier projects that you can put onto the current console in the meantime, and we're seeing more and more mounting evidence of that pop up at the most recent Nintendo Direct. We're getting Super Mario RPG as essentially the big holiday title for Nintendo, which it releases this November. That's coming out in a time slot that Nintendo typically has a major first-party AAA game, and we are getting an SNES classic remade from the ground up, or you could really say it kind of sticks to the same gameplay and core, and it's remastered more than a remake, but we are getting a graphically enhanced version of that classic game. And of course, the idea from this video really spawned similar to the GameCube conversation, where we're seeing things like Pikmin 1 and 2 released in a collection in HD, sold for $50 together or $30 a piece, and we're also seeing one-off projects like Metroid Prime Remastered, which got more love and attention and was sold at a $40 price point, a classic GameCube title. And now we're seeing Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, and prior to it, we've had games like Miitopia, amongst many other third-party 3DS games that have made it to the Switch, and I do think that Nintendo could handpick the 3DS library games just the same as they do with the GameCube, and a few of them to briefly go over with you guys to kind of drive home the point that Nintendo has plenty to choose from. Number one on my list, and I don't necessarily think that this is coming in this form, but I do think it would be fantastic to see happen in some way, shape, or form. I will give it one spot, even though it's technically two games: Zelda Ocarina of Time 3DS and Majora's Mask 3DS. They each received a remake, I feel like, on the wrong platform. These are two classic, timeless Zelda games, and arguably some of the best in the series ever, and Ocarina of Time is always one that goes down in the top of any Zelda fan's list for really what it did for Zelda games as a whole, as it was the kind of base formula for really 3D action adventure games, period, but it did so much to form the series, the lore, and it took it all to the next level. And these games, while incredible, you can only play them easily in handheld mode and not in a TV docked experience like we have the option of doing with the Switch. And while there are plenty complaints around the 3DS version of Majora's Mask, I still think that graphically, with the enhancements that these games got and some of the quality of life improvements overall, that if these came over as a combo pack for $60 or standalone titles at $30 or $40, it would still be a great deal. And we'd never know if Nintendo will take the time to go through and give these each a more intense remake or remaster treatment in the future, but we might be waiting a long time before something like that happens. And in the meantime, I would love to see these ported over either individually or in a combo pack of some sort, and maybe, just maybe, at some point between this generation and the next, we may see that happen. Metroid Samus Returns is the next game on the list that is a clear, obvious as day, port it to the Switch, up-res it. It's gonna look dang near as good as Metroid Dread, although not quite as visually enhanced as that game, but if you do some touch up to it, it really will look and play just as well. And if you enjoyed Metroid Dread like I did, and you want to have the best version of every Metroid game playable on your modern hardware, this is a no-brainer, because this remake, Mercury Steam, hit it out of the park with it. I can't say enough positive things about it. I won't go in super in-depth length of this game. It is a classic 2D Metroid style game, and it's the second in the series ever, but it got a from the ground up remake from Mercury Steam on the 3DS, and I wish this was playable on the Switch. It's another shoe-in one that I think Nintendo could easily throw on the platform towards the end of the Switch's life cycle to give us another game to release, maybe in the early part of 2024. I'm hopeful that if we get a Metroid section at the next September Nintendo Direct, that we may learn about a game like this, or at least Prime 1 or 2, while we are sitting around waiting and wondering what's going on with Metroid Prime 4. Super Mario 3D Land is an excellent Mario game that if you've played Super Mario 3D World, you essentially know what to expect, but it's different levels, it's a different adventure. It's a game that if you just showed a little bit of love and attention to, could easily be repackaged and resold at a $40 to $60 price point in the modern market. And again, if you are a hardcore Zelda fan, Mario fan, Metroid fan, you really want to have all of the various adventures that your characters that you know and love have gone through on your console today, and this is another one that just makes pure sense to port to the Switch. And while I think it might be a little bit less likely to get that treatment, it's not out of the question. I definitely wasn't expecting Luigi's Dark Moon to be announced at the most recent Direct, and here we are talking about it as a 2024 game. So I do think that there's at least somewhat of a chance that if Nintendo has a gap in their release lineup, that they may go back and bring us Mario 3D Land on modern hardware. Now, the next game we're talking about actually has its fair share of rumor mill speculation talk around it potentially coming to the Switch, and it is none other than Kid Icarus Uprising. You may remember in a video from Mr. Sakurai himself that he kind of hinted and suggested that this game may be in the pipeline, because he straight up said, "I wish someone would port it to the Nintendo Switch," and looked at the camera ominously, or as if he knew something. Now, maybe he was just nudging at Nintendo saying, "Hey, I want this project to come on to the modern hardware. Why don't you bring it over?" Or because he's involved with the game, he also could very well say, "Hey, this is my baby. I want to bring it to the Switch. We're in the process of doing it right now, and I just can't officially say that, but I'll let you decide on how credible or viable that piece of information might be around suggesting whether or not this game is coming over." But it's another fantastic entry from the 3DS's library that if you just reworked some of the controls and up-res, you could have a great action-adventure shooter with incredible boss battles and story throughout, playable on the Switch. And the last game, yes, we're double dipping on Zelda in this conversation, or triple dipping if you count Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time totally separate in this list. Anyway, A Link Between Worlds really needs to come to the Nintendo Switch. This was such a cool adventure, a love letter, and almost a partial remake to A Link to the Past, but so flawlessly done. That mechanic where Link can go onto the wall as part of the adventure and part of the way that he solves puzzles is so super enjoyable. You have to really think outside of the box in the dungeons that they had throughout the game, and the story is fantastic as well with Hyrule, Lorule. I won't spoil any of the details, but I would love to have a reason to boot up that game again and play it to completion on a TV, because while I did spend plenty of hours in handheld on my 3DS XL, I still never gave it probably the love and attention it deserved as far as a Zelda game, just due to the fact that I like to play things on a TV whenever possible, and that 3DS XL screen wasn't quite big enough for me, and I can't remember if I ever did a full 100% run on that game, so I'm itching to replay it. I think it would be a great port and remaster, and I also hope the Zelda games we see released today, like Tears of the Kingdom and open world Zelda going forward, isn't the only version of Zelda we get, and we get some more original stories like this one developed alongside of those games. And I think that a great way to jumpstart that conversation again, and maybe even give Grezzo something else to work on as a remaster Zelda project, A Link Between Worlds makes a lot of sense to me. But I really want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, what games you would like to see make it over to the Nintendo Switch or the successor to the Switch as a port or remaster, and do you think that we will see Nintendo do this with a number of different titles as opposed to getting something like 3DS added in to Nintendo Switch Online, which clearly you'd have to have some kind of special controller for. It remains to be seen how, if at all, they'll bring over DS and 3DS games to NSO in the future because of the control scheme, but how do you want them to do it personally? Would you rather have more of a up-res remaster treatment, or would you rather just see them added into Nintendo's subscription service in the future? And what are your all-time favorite 3DS games? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before we leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.